Imagine a longtime friend comes to you, looking very emotionally distraught. She says she needs money, and a lot of it, right now, or else her life is in danger. That sum of money also happens to be your entire life savings. Even though this is a longtime friend, this person has a record of manipulating people emotionally. She is also an incredibly good actor. You are a perfectionist, and you hate being scammed and manipulated. But you don't have time to investigate or look at evidence. You have to act now or she might die. Now pause at this moment and factor out time. At this point, you only have the option of believing or not believing this person. Her actions, words, expressions, and movements are all you have to work with. With a limited set of facts to work with, you have to subjectively pick your decision based on what seems right. Now we take this single point in time and extrapolate it to all time. That is a simplified version of what we have right now. Forget about whether or not something is accurate or true. There needs to be someone on the other side, removed from the situation itself, to make that subjective decision. So how do you know that her emotions are real? How do you know that everyone you've ever known has real emotions and that they're real people? You never knew for sure, you believed it. Because what you see coming out from their end is all the evidence that you have. Within this set of constraints, you can observe and sense which direction is the right one, which gives you the best return, which one is the safest bet. If you have a rare disease or medical condition, you don't know if your doctor can save or cure you. You don't know if a doctor is even the best person to treat you in general. But you can make a reasonable bet that a licensed and qualified doctor has a better chance of keeping you healthy and curing your diseases than a random person off the street. As for intellectuals, academics, in their poor quality discussions around AI and its role in the future, they cannot imagine a world ruled by belief, powered by context. They are so desperate to find out certainty to latch onto, the same kind of certainty provided by intellectual arguments and mathematical calculations. So hypnotized are they by its apparent indifference that they end up with the complete opposite, a profound detachment from context. Understanding reality means understanding belief. If belief is being relegated to a class of undesirables, then your cover of neutrality, objectivity, or indifference is already blown. If what is being discussed only relies on facts and information specific to that context, then it's pointless to try and predict how AI or any other technology will affect life. Because the context will keep changing, and constantly trying to pivot and adapt to it at best makes for entertaining debate and discussion, and at worst is an endless cycle of discussion that seems very intelligent and complex, while being a waste of time. We can get a lot of use from seeing that belief is not just an alternative option, something that you can fall back on if you don't have the truth. It is also absolutely essential in determining what is real and what isn't. Which brings us to the most frustrating thing about a typical AI discussion that tries to seem as if it is complex thinking, but can really be distilled into predictable, recycled arguments around AI replacing us. The tired and overused technology is making us disconnected from reality and is wasting our time. AI taking on human characteristics, AI being used for evil, AI getting better and better at replication. More specifically, that AI will be able to create replications that seem so real that it would be undistinguishable from reality. Of course, to live, our investment in objective reality has to be substantial. Of course, we should counter lies, misinformation, and delusion in a very direct way. But if your sense of reality is so fragile, so conditional, that it can be destroyed just by a very highly detailed replication, then the problem isn't that our sense of reality isn't good enough, or that our picture isn't accurate enough, but that we're so incredibly insecure about it. Then, maybe it's fair to consider that this means that we spend a lot less time actually in reality than we like to assume. Everything that seems real, in other words, everything, has mechanisms to preserve its continuity, whether it's a physical reality or a non-physical truth. Ideology, or an extrapolated thought process, has a way of transcending physicality in such a way that it develops its own physicality, its own intensity that is powerful enough to convince the subject to believe in it. Consider that there is evidence literally everywhere to contradict what you believe, and your little version of a truth, but you never make the connection. It's not like this evidence is hiding or hidden by some evil power. It is literally right in front of you in plain sight. You might even notice it, but it never occurs to you that this is a contradiction. You couldn't make the connection even if you tried, and when you do, it never becomes an actual form in your mind, in the same way that your religion, your politics, or your identity does. Belief is always more powerful than unbelief. Maybe sometimes you even admit that there are certain exceptions to a truth, making a necessary compromise, a mechanism of flexibility, in order to keep the rest of the illusion going. Maybe sometimes you go as far as admitting that this is all really only subjective. Anything that anyone ever believes to be true is really just up to circumstance. Perhaps someone deeply indoctrinated in one religion, in certain periods, in certain situations, will even admit that there are parallels and similarities to each religion, and that there is such a thing as my belief and your belief. Maybe there are glitches or inconsistencies to your logic that you have to contend with, that you admit are unresolved, and so you have a brief moment of self-honesty, and for a while, the grip of that ideology eases on you. But the moment the ideology, directly in name, is threatened, everything involved in preserving its form comes rushing back, for no other reason than the feeling or instinct that something precious is in danger, and that you, the subject, must mobilize to defend it. You lose your ability to think rationally. You lose your ability to notice certain things. Your window of awareness narrows. You start to see any contradiction as a threat, a physical threat. Physical barriers are deployed to keep that ideology alive within your system. And so the illusion lives another day. Ideologies, behavior, and thought patterns that are so immaterial, and at the same time, so incredibly concrete. When beliefs are threatened, in other words, when something that doesn't have any substance senses danger, the response is real, and the threat is treated like a real threat. And you'd be right to feel that way, because there is a lot at stake here. What's at stake is sanity in the short term. Death, right here, right now, is unacceptable, but you know it'll happen eventually. And so the question becomes, what can artificially fill that gap? You know you will die, but you believe that if you raise your kids well, that you can live on through them. You know that money is just money, but you believe that if you accumulate as much of it as possible, that you can transcend death and mortality before you die. You know that your political ideology is only belief, but you also like the feeling in the back of your mind, even though it might only be superficial, even though it might only be temporary, that your existence and whatever you value in this world will be tolerated for a little longer. You don't know the way to a successful life, but you believe that if you copy that person, if you listen to that teacher, if you go to that college, that you can use this as a crutch, a justification for your more short-sighted activities, such that you have a foot in the present while also giving lip service to the future. You know that there are limits to what humans can understand and be aware of, but you're stuck in this limited form for a while, and you're mesmerized by the certainty and predictability that mathematics and empirical research provides. So you believe that if you come up with the perfect equation, you can get to a theory of everything, which would mean the end of time for you and the rest of humanity. And finally, you understand that you are mortal, but you want to exist outside of time. So someone else gets you to believe that there is one true God, as opposed to all the others, and that faith is all you need to get an afterlife. Conveniently, you now have this platform that can be used to fulfill all your short-term material needs while giving lip service to death or the absolute. It's belief, all of it. Down to the last molecule, down to the last word you ever speak. Even if there is truth to the belief, you still have to decide whether or not to believe it. That never goes away. It doesn't matter how absurd it is, how blatant the contradictions are, or the obvious limitations of a system of belief. If it is convincing enough, the subject will believe it. So why would our time be any different? The only way we can be so insecure about the value of our existence is when you have a double standard. Everything that is done by us serves the purpose of existing without consequence, and yet we also have to assign various terms and conditions for earning the right to exist. Since we're so selfish, so judgmental, so selective in our approval, we have to assume that any higher purpose or any greater power that brought AI into our environment is just as selfish as we are. We would give anything to exist without reason, but cannot help but assign reason to existence. The discussion around AI is still essentially a nerd's way of practicing religion, their own existential crisis, a product of their indulgence in thought and on systematic thinking, detached from the experience of most, lacking the core of what most ordinary people possess without ever having to work for it. The ability to exist without reason, to survive without thinking of anything else, without considering any consequences other than that of their immediate needs. That is a luxury that these privileged intellectuals do not have. So yes, we are living in a simulation, not because we see parallel aspects that we see in storytelling also happen in real life, not because there might be an unseen force behind the scenes pulling the strings, and not because we've found some glitches in the matrix. Unless we can recognize the actual extent in which we rely on belief, from the practical all the way to the existential, this game of second guessing continues indefinitely. How will this new technology affect us? Is it friendly? Is it a threat? How do we respond to this situation? What institutional changes do we need? What systemic changes do we need? How do we understand our role in the ecosystem? These self-interested lines of questioning can be fun to engage in and might even lead to some short-term solutions, something that can preserve faith in the current system a little longer. But let's actually, for once, instead of endlessly chasing our tails, notice some obvious things. That countless assumptions are made by you and everyone you know, every day, for as long as you've known, and somehow, you're still alive. Say that you make the connection that living in a simulation shouldn't be the most shocking thing that you hear about. Maybe we even notice that corruption and evil are all real, and that there are real threats to human existence, such as new technologies, but also that there have always been, just like there are right now as you listen, liars, scammers, and exploiters freely walking around, just doing their thing. Maybe you notice that this is nothing new, and that life was able to preserve itself through far worse, as it has this ability to completely immerse itself in a lie, and yet, more often than not, come out the other side. And you notice that you live in a world ruled by belief, both in the past and right this moment, and that you've always had the power to decide, to believe who your friends and who your enemies are, and to believe what is bad and what is good, all as a calculated risk made by you, the perceiver.